Assalamualaikum everyone. Welcome to LSC webinar series. Our today's webinar is on navigating telecom law, scope, challenges, and opportunities in Pakistan. I am Isha Gul, Secretary Procurement at Law Student Council, Pakistan, and I am thrilled to have a distinguished guest with us today, Mr. Asad Ladha. I'm thrilled to have I'm thrilled to have Mr. Asad and to dive into the world of telecommunication laws. Thank you, Mr. Asad, for being here. Let's make this webinar a great learning experience for everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
To introduce our speaker, Mr. Asad holds the degree of LLB from King's College London, LLM from University of Leiden, and Bar at Law from Lincoln's Inn. Mr. Asad is an advocate at High Court and partner at Raja Mohammed Akram Co. He represented a number of regulatory bodies, including the State Bank of Pakistan, the Competition Commission of Pakistan, and the Securities and Exchange Commissioner of Pakistan. He has also contributed to the book titled International Institutional Law and being recognized for the former legal advisor for the Ministry of Justice, UK. Due to his experience of both Pakistani and foreign jurisdiction, Mr. Asad has built up considerable expertise and advises on a range of civil, commercial, telecommunication, and tax matters with an international element. He is also acting with External Counsel CMPak Limited, Zong, in a number of matters ranging from tax to regulatory affairs. With his extensive background in commercial and telecommunication, Mr. Asad Ladha brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in our webinar. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Asad.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's begin by introducing what are the telecom laws and what technologies and services it covers in Pakistan.
Yes, so just in terms of a general overview, in Pakistan, you have four main telecommunication providers in the market at the moment. They are Jazz. They're known as Jazz. Actually, the official name is Mobile Link. There's Zong, there's Ufone, and there's Telenor. So those are the four main providers who provide mobile telecommunication services. They are regulated by the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority, and commonly known as the PTA. And the PTA has a statute that creates the PTA and which also governs the telecommunication industry in Pakistan. It's called the Pakistan Telecommunication Reorganization Act of 1996. So that statute governs various different things within the telecommunication sector. And essentially, these four main telecommunication providers have to obtain a license from the PTA. That license is for a specific period. They have to meet certain conditions in order to obtain that license, and they have to fulfill certain conditions during the course of that license. And their activities, their compliances with their license is monitored by the regulator, the PTA. Now, the main resource that is important for the telecommunication sector in Pakistan is called frequency spectrum. Now, frequency spectrum is measured in megahertz. It's these radio waves that we cannot see, but through which all our data, our text messages, our phone calls, they travel through these frequencies. We cannot see them, but they're there somewhere in the sky. And these different telecommunication companies, they bid for different frequencies. And there is an auction held by the PTA. And these telecommunication companies, they bid in this auction to acquire these frequencies. It's called frequency spectrum. Now, they operate on different levels. Some frequencies are better than others. It's quite technical, actually. But very generally, certain frequencies are more sought after because they're better penetration in houses, etc. So some frequencies are more sought after than others. So they bid on these frequency spectrum, they acquire this, and then they offer different services to customers. There is also a separate field called the LDI sector, which is foreign calls. So if you make a call or send a message to somewhere outside Pakistan, that's a separate sector called the LDI sector. That's governed by its own rules. There's different companies within that sector, but that is outside of Pakistan if a call is being made or call is being received from outside of Pakistan. So they're governed by the Act. And then in addition to the Act, there are various different rules, regulations, guidelines, policy directives that also make up the telecommunication laws within Pakistan that apply to the telecommunications sector.
Very well explained, sir. Can you discuss any recent investments or developments in the telecom sector that have been facilitated by favorable laws?
I think the PTA, the regulator, has tried to move with the technologies around the world. So you will have heard the phrases 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G. So these are different technologies that have been introduced from time to time throughout the world and in Pakistan. And essentially, the technology gets better. Internet services get faster as the technology is improved. So right now, the PTA is moving towards holding the 5G auction to auction off frequencies for the 5G service. So that's going to happen soon. And similarly, they did the same thing with 4G when it came about in the rest of the world. So I think the PTA is constantly trying to move with the times, move with the changing technologies. And of course, when there is an auction for 3G or 4G or 5G, that brings in significant foreign investment, because some of the telecommunication providers like Zong are owned by a Chinese entity. So Zong is a Chinese entity. So it brings in foreign investment to pay for the frequency that it bids for during the auction. So each one of these auctions brings in foreign investment. It creates revenue for the state, and that, of course, improves the state's financial position. So I think even the latest 5G auction will create significant inflow of funds, both from abroad and domestically, to the state exchequer.
Okay, sir. Now moving further, can you tell us more about in what ways do telecom laws affect service providers, consumers, and the overall market? Furthermore, what are the prevalent consumer rights challenges in the telecom industry, and how can current laws address these issues effectively?
I mean, they affect the service providers firstly because service providers have to be very vigilant about their requirements that they have to follow within the relevant legal framework. They have to ensure that they comply with the terms of their license, with the relevant requirements under the Act, the rules, the regulations, because they're constantly being monitored by the regulator. And if they fall short of either the conditions of their license, or if they fail to comply with any of the applicable legal provisions, the PTA can issue them with a show cause notice and say to them, look, you have not complied. The PTA can impose fines, and sometimes heavy fines, on the telecommunication providers. So they're constantly being vigilant. They have regulatory teams, they have legal teams who are constantly monitoring to see whether they're complying with all the legal requirements that are applicable to them. In terms of the customer, of course, if the service provider is not complying with its legal obligations, that can have a knock-on effect to the customer. They have to ensure that customers are treated properly, they're not misguided. A telecommunication provider may be misguiding customers about a particular package. When you go out into the market to buy a particular package of data, of calls, a telecommunication provider is bound by certain rules in terms of how it can advertise, what it can say, what it cannot say, what kind of prices it is charging customers, etc. So customers are always impacted by how well a service provider complies with its legal obligations.
ओके सर, यू आर एक्सप्लेनिंग वेरी वेल सर। सर, अगर हम ऐसे कॉमन पर्सन्स के बारे में बात करें तो आपको क्या लगता है कि ऐसे कौन से टेलीकॉम लॉज हैं जो कि एवरी स्टेक होल्डर या एक कॉमन पर्सन को लाजमी पता होना चाहिए, कि आपको पता हो कि ये टेलीकॉम लॉज हैं जो कि हर कॉमन पर्सन के नॉलेज में लाजमी होने चाहिए?
देखिए, एक रिसेंट एग्जांपल बहुत ही रेलेवेंट है कि रिसेंटली एफबीआर ने एक इनकम टैक्स जनरल ऑर्डर इशू किया है, जिसके तहत उनने ये कहा है कि अगर कोई शख्स फाइलर नहीं है, इनकम टैक्स फाइलर नहीं है और उसको होना चाहिए, तो टेलीकम्युनिकेशन प्रोवाइडर्स को ये कहा गया है कि आप उनका सिम ब्लॉक कर दें। सो दैट्स अ वेरी सीरियस कॉन्सिक्वेंस कि अगर आपको फाइलर होना चाहिए और आपने अपनी रजिस्ट्रेशन नहीं कराई, आपने अपने टैक्स फाइलिंग नहीं की, तो आपका सिम कार्ड ब्लॉक हो सकता है। और उसके साथ साथ उन्होंने ये भी कहा है कि आपके अगर बिजली का कनेक्शन है आपके नाम पे, तो वो बिजली का कनेक्शन या गैस का कनेक्शन भी वो काट सकते हैं इस इनकम टैक्स जनरल ऑर्डर के तहत। तो ये बड़ा सीरियस कॉन्सिक्वेंस है कि शायद लोगों को ये ना पता हो, हमारे मुल्क में सब टैक्स फाइलर नहीं होते। कुछ लोग जानबूझ के नहीं होते कि उनको टैक्स नहीं देना होता, कुछ लोगों को नहीं पता होता कि उनको टैक्स फाइलर बनना है, तो वो इनएडवर्टेंटली विदाउट नोइंग टैक्स फाइलर नहीं होते। लेकिन हो सकता है एक दिन वो अपना फोन इस्तेमाल कर रहे हों और अचानक से उनका फोन बंद हो जाए और फिर उनको जाना पड़े अपने सर्विस प्रोवाइडर के पास, चाहे वो जैज है, टेलीनॉर है, यूफोन है, और वो जाए और वो पूछें कि आप मुझे बताएं मेरा फोन क्यों बंद हो गया, और वो उनको कहेंगे कि जी आपका फोन इसलिए बंद हो गया कि आपने अपने टैक्स फाइलिंग नहीं की। तो ये बड़ा जरूरी है कि लोगों को ये पता चलना शुरू हो जाए कि अब ये एक कॉन्सिक्वेंस आ गया है टैक्स फाइलर ना होने का, कि आपका सिम कार्ड ब्लॉक हो सकता है। और जाहिर सी बात है, अब हम अपने फोन पे इतना रिलायंट हैं सब लोग, अगर आपका फोन एक दिन के लिए भी बंद हो जाए तो मेरा ख्याल है आप पैरालाइज हो जाते हैं, इसलिए कि हर चीज अब आपके फोन पे होती है। तो लोगों को ये चेक करना चाहिए कि जी क्या उनको टैक्स फाइलर होना चाहिए, और अगर होना चाहिए तो उनको शायद ये एडवाइस लेना चाहिए कि वो किस तरह से टैक्स फाइलर बन सकते हैं, वरना उनके लिए बड़े सीरियस कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस हो सकते हैं। उसी तरह से आई थिंक आपको अपने राइट्स पता होना चाहिए कि अगर आपको कोई, फर्ज करें किसी सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स ने पैकेज ऑन कर दिया आपका और आपने इजाजत नहीं दी थी पैकेज ऑन करने की और आपको चार्जेस उन्हें लगा दिए हैं, तो आपको ये पता होना चाहिए कि किस सर्कमस्टांसेस में आपके क्या राइट्स हैं, आप किस तरह से उसको चैलेंज कर सकते हैं, आप टेलीकम्युनिकेशन प्रोवाइडर के खिलाफ क्या कर सकते हैं। हमारे यहाँ कंज्यूमर कोर्ट बना हुआ है और मुख्तलिफ सूबों में हमारे कंज्यूमर कोर्ट्स हैं, तो आप उनके पास जा सकते हैं। यू कैन अप्रोच अ कंज्यूमर कोर्ट विद अ कंप्लेंट कि अगर आपके खिलाफ कोई टेलीकम्युनिकेशन प्रोवाइडर ने कुछ ऐसी चीज की है तो आप उस कंज्यूमर कोर्ट के पास जा सकते हैं। तो these are just two examples. The first one I think is very important and very current, जो recently चीज आई है जो शायद लोगों को नहीं पता हो। मैं ये भी ऐड करना चाहूँ कि हमने जोंग की तरफ से ये इनकम टैक्स जनरल ऑर्डर हाई कोर्ट में चैलेंज किया हुआ है और वो अभी हाई कोर्ट में प्रोसीडिंग्स चल रही हैं, और मुख्तलिफ दूसरे प्रोवाइडर्स जो सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स हैं, टेलीकम्युनिकेशन प्रोवाइडर्स, उनने भी चैलेंज किया हुआ है इस्लामाबाद हाई कोर्ट के सामने।
वेरी वेल एक्सप्लेन सर। सर, आप अगर हम बात कर रहे हैं कि कॉमन केसेस इस तरह के आते हैं, तो क्या आप हमें इसके बारे में फर्दर गाइड कर सकते हैं कि टेलीकम्युनिकेशन लॉज के एम्बिट के अंदर कौन से ऐसे मोस्टली कॉमन केसेस आते हैं और उन्हें टिपिकली किस तरह रिजॉल्व किस तरह किया जाता है, ताकि थोड़ा सा आइडिया हो कि इन्हें रिजॉल्व करने का क्या वे है?
देखिए, एक टेलीकम्युनिकेशन कंपनी होती है, उसके बहुत डाइवर्स किस्म के लीगल इश्यूज आ सकते हैं। सबसे बड़ा जो इनका एक तो इशू है जो मैंने पहले बात की, रेगुलेटरी अफेयर्स। उसका क्या मतलब है? उसका मतलब ये है कि आपके जो रेगुलेटर के साथ इश्यूज हैं वो आपके चलते रहते हैं। रेगुलेटर आपको कॉन्स्टेंटली मॉनिटर कर रहा होता है कि जी आप अपने कंप्लायंसेस कर रहे हैं लाइसेंस के मुताबिक, कानून के मुताबिक या नहीं। तो एक तो एवेन्यू है कि आपके रेगुलेटरी इश्यूज आ सकते हैं विद द रेगुलेटर। रेगुलेटर आपके ऊपर अगर फाइन लगा दे कि आपने अपनी लाइसेंस के मुताबिक कंडीशंस नहीं मीट की या कानून की खिलाफ वर्जी की है, तो आपको रेगुलेटर के साथ एंगेज करना पड़ता है। अगर रेगुलेटर आप पे फाइन लगा दे तो आपको किस तरह से कंटेस्ट करना है, दैट्स वन एवेन्यू। फिर टेलीकम्युनिकेशन कंपनीज के टैक्स इश्यूज हो सकते हैं जैसे और कंपनीज के होते हैं। सिमिलरली आपके एज अ टेलीकम्युनिकेशन कंपनी बाहर से काफी इक्विपमेंट आ रही होती है। ये आप देखते हैं जब आप बाहर जाते हैं, ये बड़े बड़े टावर्स लगे होते हैं। ये टावर्स होते हैं सिग्नल्स रिसीव करने के लिए फोन से। आप जब कॉल करते हैं तो आपके फोन से सिग्नल जाता है टावर पे, टावर से फिर आगे वो ट्रांसमिट होता है कहीं और, फिर जाके जो जिसको आप कॉल कर रहे हैं या मैसेज कर रहे हैं उनके फोन पे रिसीव होता है। तो ये सारी चीजों के लिए उनको इक्विपमेंट चाहिए होती है टेलीकम्युनिकेशन प्रोवाइडर को, और ये इक्विपमेंट अक्सर बाहर से आती है, तो उनके कस्टम्स से इश्यूज हो सकते हैं, ताकि उनकी कस्टम्स क्लियरेंस नहीं हो रही है गुड्स की या इक्विपमेंट की। फिर हो सकता है कि आपके टावर में कोई चोरी हो जाए, या आपके टावर में आपकी इक्विपमेंट कोई चोरी कर ले, आपको फिर पुलिस अथॉरिटीज से आपको एंगेज करना पड़ता है। इस तरह के इश्यूज भी आते हैं टेलीकम्युनिकेशन कंपनीज को, फिर उन्हें जाके एफआईआर कटवानी पड़ती है और पुलिस अथॉरिटीज से एंगेज करना पड़ता है। So in any given time, a telecommunication company is engaged in different areas of law and facing different legal challenges on a day-to-day basis.
अमेजिंग सर। सर आप ऐसे केसेस के बारे में बता रहे हैं, आपने जैसे पहले बताया कि फाइलर होना और इस तरह के बारे में लाजमी पता होना चाहिए, तो ऐसे क्या आप कोई और लैंडमार्क लीगल केसेस को रिलेट कर सकते हैं टेलीकॉम लॉ में, जिन्होंने इंडस्ट्री को रिसेंट ईयर्स में काफ़ी शेप किया हो, या जिनकी वजह से कोई भी इनोवेशन आई हो, या कोई भी लीगल केसेस जो कि लैंडमार्क केसेस कंसिडर किए जाते हो?
जी देखिए, एक तो रिसेंटली आपने शायद सुना होगा कि जैज एक टेलीकम्युनिकेशन प्रोवाइडर होता था वारिद के नाम से पहले। तो जैज और वारिद का अभी रिसेंटली आई थिंक 2016-17 में मर्जर हो गया, तो वो मिल गए, एक कंपनी बन गई। उसकी वजह से उस वक्त काफी इश्यूज आए थे कि क्या अगर वो एक कंपनी बन जाते हैं तो वो ज्यादा मजबूत तो नहीं हो जाएंगे, और दूसरे ऑपरेटर्स के लिए ये डिफिकल्टी तो नहीं पैदा होगी, कंपटीशन कंसर्न्स तो नहीं उठ रहे उसकी वजह से, मोनोपोली तो नहीं क्रिएट हो रही उनकी। तो ये कंपटीशन कमीशन में काफी इशू चला था और अल्टीमेटली उनको इजाजत मिल गई थी, लेकिन उसकी वजह से वो टेलीकम्युनिकेशन सेक्टर काफी बदल गया था, जैज की काफी डोमिनेंस हो गई थी उसके बाद। अब रिसेंटली एक और भी लिटिगेशन चल रही है जोंग के फ्रीक्वेंसी के मुताबिक। जब जोंग को फ्रीक्वेंसी स्पेक्ट्रम मिला था तो उसमें काफी इंटरफेरेंस थी। उसका ये मतलब है कि उनके सिग्नल्स वगैरह काफी ड्रॉप होते थे, उनकी लाइंस में इंटरफेरेंस आती थी, मुख्तलिफ उसकी वजूहात थी। तो वो भी जोंग उसकी वजह से काफी लिटिगेशन में है पिछले 3-4 सालों से। और उसके अलावा अगर आप देखें आईटी जियो वाला मामला भी जो मैंने बताया, वो भी काफी ग्राउंड ब्रेकिंग है। तो ये सबसे रिसेंटली अभी जो एक प्रपोजल है, प्रपोज ट्रांजैक्शन हो रहा है, वो यूफोन और टेलीनॉर का मर्जर एक प्रपोजल है अभी। तो अभी एक ट्रांजैक्शन की प्रपोजल है कि यूफोन और पीटीसीएल यूफोन उनका नाम है, वो उनने प्रपोज किया है कि वो टेलीनॉर से मर्ज करना चाहते हैं। तो वो अभी एक मेजर इशू चल रहा है इंडस्ट्री में कि अगर ये हो जाता है फिर सिर्फ 3 प्लेयर्स रहेंगे टेलीकम्युनिकेशन सेक्टर में। तो उसके भी रिपरकशंस डिस्कस हो रहे हैं कि क्या उसकी वजह से जो एंटिटी बच जाएगी मर्जर के बाद, क्या वो ज्यादा स्ट्रॉन्ग तो नहीं होगी, उसमें कंपटीशन कमीशन कंसर्न्स तो ज्यादा नहीं है। तो वो एक अभी मेजर चीज चल रही है टेलीकम्युनिकेशन सेक्टर में, यूफोन और टेलीनॉर का मर्जर।
Amazing, sir. Sir, can you tell us about most significant regulatory challenges currently telecom sector is facing in Pakistan?
One issue is that abhi there is a 5G auction that's coming up that I mentioned earlier, and that will require significant investment from the telecommunication providers. But the current economic situation in Pakistan is not good. Pakistan's it's not great place for a very attractive place for people to invest. Let's put it that way. A lot of foreign investors are very hesitant at the moment to invest in Pakistan, given the current economic situation. तो उसकी वजह से उनका काफी बड़ा challenge होगा to attract the investment for this 5G auction. So we will see what the appetite is from the telecommunication providers, how much they invest. But there's always a concern when investing large amounts of money in Pakistan, because often foreign investors face all sorts of different challenges about how to get their profits outside Pakistan. They face multiple challenges from the tax authorities. So they always think twice before putting money in and investing in Pakistan. So that's a significant challenge for the state and the PTA. And also, I think this merger that I mentioned between PTCL and UFON, that's also going to create significant repercussions and have significant consequences for the telecommunication sector. As I said, sirf teen players reh jayenge. And will that be enough competition in the market? That's one question. लेकिन customers के लिए अगर competitive environment है, मुख्तलिफ players हैं, तो customers के लिए अच्छा है, price drive down होती है, वो एक दूसरे से compete करते हैं. तो अगर कुछ ही players बच जाएंगे, एक हमेशा customers के लिए concern होगी कि prices ज़्यादा बढ़ तो नहीं जाएंगे, इसलिए वो price control तो नहीं करेंगे. So that's one thing the PTA will have to look at, control. The Competition Commission will have to look at and control.
Very well said, sir. सर जैसे कि आपने बोला है कि यहाँ पे कंपटीशन कम हो जाएगा और आपका इंटरनेशनल में भी काफ़ी एक्सपीरियंस है, तो आपको क्या लगता है कि किस एक्सटेंट तक जो टेलीकॉम लॉज हैं इन पाकिस्तान कंपैटिबल हैं इंटरनेशनल स्टैंडर्ड्स के साथ, और कौन से ऐसे इनिशिएटिव्स हैं जो कि लेने चाहिए ताकि इस तरह के डिस्प्यूट्स जो हैं, जो भी अगर कोई इंटरनेशनल पार्टीज भी हैं या फिर कोई भी पाकिस्तान में भी इस तरह के डिस्प्यूट्स हैं, तो उनको कौन से ऐसे इनिशिएटिव्स लेने चाहिए जिनसे वो रिजॉल्व हो सकें?
देखिए, एक चीज तो यह है कि जो कवानीन बनाते हैं इधर टेलीकम्युनिकेशन सेक्टर से मुतालिक और जो गाइडलाइंस इशू होती हैं और जो मुख्तलिफ लीगल फ्रेमवर्क में चीज़ें हैं, वो इंटरनेशनल स्टैंडर्ड्स के मुताबिक वो कोशिश करते हैं बनाएं. दे टेक अ लॉट ऑफ गाइडेंस फ्रॉम वेरियस इंटरनेशनल स्टैंडर्ड्स, इंटरनेशनल पॉलिसीज, एंड दे ट्राई एंड इनकॉर्पोरेट दोज within our telecommunication sector in Pakistan. So a lot of the international standards are incorporated into our legal framework and also into the policies that we have. So the telecommunication providers are following international standards in a lot of the work that they do here. Sorry, आपका second question क्या था?
My second question was what initiatives have been put in place to resolve disputes concerning international parties?
देखिए, आई थिंक जो फॉरेन पार्टीज हैं पाकिस्तान में टेलीकम्युनिकेशन सेक्टर में, they have to comply with the local laws, the legal framework, and if they have an issue, they have to approach the local courts. So perhaps some incorporation can be done of arbitration. They could think about incorporating a foreign arbitration clause, but generally, even if it's a foreign party investing in Pakistan in the telecommunication sector, it has to approach the local courts for remedying its legal disputes that arise either with the PTA or with any other body or authority.
So moving forward, sir, how does Pakistan's telecom sector compare to international standards in terms of environmental impact? Are there any recent amendments or proposed changes to telecom laws in Pakistan in this regard?
I mean, frankly speaking, I'm not particularly sure in terms of what the international environmental standards are in the telecommunications sector. Not an expert in that field. I do know that in terms of the activities that the local domestic, the operators who are operating in the domestic market, they would have to comply with the relevant environmental laws. And if you think about it, how does the telecommunication sector impact the environment? Well, they have these towers. One would have to see to what extent these towers, these massive towers that we see, how they are impacting the environment. Secondly, the headsets, what happens to the headsets that get discarded? There's a lot of plastic in these headsets. I think, there are initiatives to have these phones recycled. जब आप फोन एक बार यूज करना बंद कर देते हैं तो उसको क्या होता है, वो किधर जाता है? ठीक है, एक बार बिकेगा, दूसरी बार बिकेगा, लेकिन ultimately that will go and be thrown away. So, if they're not, there ought to be initiatives to kind of somehow recycle these used phones that are no longer going to be used, and not, have them just thrown into landfill where they will impact the environment.
Very well explained, sir. Coming towards the next question, what are the career opportunities within the telecom regulatory sector in Pakistan, and what skills and qualifications are essential to work in telecom law and regulations?
Okay, so someone who's just graduating, or if you're a junior lawyer, there are various options available to you. One of the options is to kind of go into a litigation firm or chambers who are doing litigation work. There you are not just engaged in telecommunication laws, you are doing all sorts of various different areas of law. The other option is to go to a corporate style firm, as we call it in Pakistan, which is not doing contentious litigation work, but more transaction work, agreements, transactions, as I said, mergers, acquisitions, this sort of work, where you're based in an office, your work is more documentary, whereas, a litigation lawyer is going to court. And the third major option is to go in-house, as we call it, into a company, whether that's a telecommunication company, whether that's an oil and gas company, whether that's a bank, that we call an in-house legal job. So all of these telecommunication companies have legal departments. Some of them are quite large, and some of them require, before they hire you, to have some practical experience, either within a firm, whether it's litigation or corporate, so that you have some experience of how the legal system works. Some also recruit fresh graduates. So I think you have to show, I think good team working skills is very essential to a telecommunication company, because within a telecommunication company and within a legal department, you're working within a team. So you have to show, that you're able to work successfully within a team environment, that you're able to work well with others, manage your time well, and you're well organized. So those sorts of skills are essential. And then, of course, your legal skills of being able to interpret the law, be able to apply a given issue or situation to the law and find solutions for the telecommunication company. And also being able to, liaise with external counsel if you have to engage external counsel like us in litigation matters. You have to have that skill of being able to do that as well. So I think there's the telecommunication providers also have regulatory departments. So there are legal departments that are dealing with, contentious legal issues when things go wrong. But there's also a regulatory department that is dealing with the regulator, the PTA. So that's kind of partly legal and partly, non-legal, because you're liaising with the regulator. So that's another option, to go into a regulatory department rather than a strict legal department within a telecommunication company.
Okay, sir. Sir, अगर कोई जो न्यू आ रहे हैं टेलीकॉम मार्केट में regarding navigating the legal landscape, उनको आप क्या एडवाइस करना चाहेंगे?
Sorry, आपकी आवाज कट गई थी. Can you please repeat?
What advice would you give to new entrants in the telecom market regarding navigating the legal landscape?
I think you have to be brave. You have to apply to these places. But before that, when you're studying, perhaps you can try and get an internship in one of these companies, or look out for maybe doing an internship with a firm which handles telecommunication disputes. That will give you an insight into the industry, the type of work that either the telecommunication provider or the law firm does. And that'll provide you with a number of advantages. You will get to know a little bit about the law in the telecommunication sector, how it works. You will also maybe make some contacts within the law firm, within telecommunication companies, because the law firm will be dealing with the companies. And you will also be able to see if you like the work. Do you like the industry? Do you like the type of work that is involved? So all of these will come if you're able to at least experience this, either an internship. And if you're applying for a job, well, then you just have to be brave. You have to just put out your CV, try and get advice from practitioners, people within the telecommunication company, reach out to them on LinkedIn, and say, I want some advice, I want some help, how would you advise? Can you take a look at my application? Is there any way I can improve it? Can I do a mock interview? So these are all things that you can try and do in order to improve your chances of perhaps getting a job either within a telecommunication company or within a firm environment.
Thank you so much for sharing, sir. I believe, sir, Isha is facing some connectivity issue, so I'll be carrying on until she can join us back. Sir, could you kindly share that in your experience, what are some practical tips for individuals to ensure they are not unknowingly violating any telecom laws in their daily use of telecommunication services?
I think you can perhaps, there are some guidelines out there that there are basic guidelines for customers on the internet that I've seen that you can take a look at that gives some basic guidance on what to look out for when you're using a mobile device, for example. Right now, recently in our country, we've seen that there's been issues with social media platforms, access to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. There have been issues with those being blocked. So a lot of people have faced difficulty accessing these platforms. And platforms that people, are very used to using on a day-to-day basis to get information, to communicate with others. So I think you keep, in touch with the news, try and keep in touch with what the latest developments are with respect to these sorts of social media platforms and whether they can be used on your mobile devices. And then also, just you can engage with some of the legal, some of the laws that are out there, just to see what the laws say, what your obligations as a customer might be. And then you can also just reach out to practitioners and, get their opinion. If you're not sure about something you think, my use might create a legal issue, then you can reach out and ask questions that way as well.
Right, sir. Thank you so much for sharing. Sir, as far as I've understood, the telecom sector is not only limited to the telecom itself, but it is also expanding towards the IT sector as well. So, what overlapping have you seen in your experience, and how does that affect the legal field as well? Because you are sure to come across multiple technologies which fall in both IT and the telecom sector as well, I hope.
Yes, so when we think of the telecom sector, we sometimes just think of a mobile phone, but that's not the case. Like I said, there's more to it than just a mobile phone. Your calls, messages are made internationally. You have the entire IT sector. Now, when you look at the IT sector, they're also governed by different statutes, and we have to think of what sort of legal obligations apply to the IT sector. They have their own regulations as to what an IT company might have to comply with. You have to get a license, a separate license to operate an IT company. Often there are IT companies operating here which are offering services abroad in the US. They're getting paid in US dollars. So they have to comply with a lot of state bank regulations. They have to get licenses to operate within Pakistan and also comply with the terms of their license from the regulator. So it's not just mobile phones. There's a lot more to it than just that.
Right, sir. Perfectly explained. Sir, furthermore, if you could also shed light upon the Pakistan Telecommunication Reorganization Act of 1996, considering that the telecom sector is definitely composed of technologies and their regulation and their working, do you believe that an act of 1996 is, able to cope up with the technology boom, which is, ever upgrading itself? And do you believe that any further relevant legislation is required to cope up with the issues which we are facing in the current times in the telecom sector?
Whilst the act is of 1996, इसमें amendments होती रही हैं और recently भी होती रही हैं. So as technologies change, as the times change, amendments have been made to the act to keep it up with the modern times, to keep it relevant, and to cover the latest developments in technology. So it's not just stuck in 96. Because of all the amendments that have been made, it is fairly applicable to present day. And it's not just the act that makes up the legal framework, you see. Act ke ilawa, rules from time to time frame hote rahe hain. Regulations are always being framed for various different technologies, for various different aspects of the telecommunication sector. So they are constantly being framed to take into account, changes in technology, changes in all sorts of different services that are introduced within Pakistan. And then you have different guidelines. You have what we call policy directives that are issued to the government. So the legal framework is not just the act. There's many other instruments that have come much later in time and recently that take into account technological and other developments within the sector. So it is modern, it is up to date. It's not just stuck in the past. And the PTA is constantly, and along with the legislature, trying to update the relevant legal framework to keep up to speed with the latest developments.
So that is wonderful to hear, and we really hope that we can move ahead with a very developed and very futuristic telecom sector. Sir, I believe we are done with the questions we had. If you would allow, I would like to take some questions from the comment section.
Sure. One thing I'll just add, which I think I forgot to mention, which has been very topical in the telecommunications sector, is this issue of phone tapping. You guys might have heard on the news that this has been quite a big issue. There was litigation within the Islamabad High Court in which the court essentially asked the questions whether the government or any entity connected to the government is entitled to listen into phone calls, messages, in what situations can that be done? And whether the current legal framework allows this to happen. If it does, who can do it? When can they do it? In what circumstances they can do it? So I think we're seeing now the judiciary engaging with this issue and trying to unmask a lot of the mysteries around this issue, which we talk about personally, but it hasn't really been before the courts as much. So we see now recently in Islamabad High Court that this issue being discussed, it's being on the news. So that's also something that you should follow. It affects everyone. It affects all of us. So that's something I'm sure that you all will be interested in and will closely follow the developments in that as well.
Thank you so much for sharing, sir, and showing us this dimension. Sir, from this particular dimension which you just mentioned, I would like to ask you that there is a particular section in the PTRA which does allow the interception of calls and the tapping of phones in some extent in the case of a national under the ambit of national security and connected thereto. Do you believe that the current recent development which has taken place is a case of national security as it has been allowed by PTRA, or that is a misinterpretation of that particular section?
Okay, so I'm engaged by Zong in this case. The Islamabad High Court has made all the telecommunication providers parties in the case that's going on. So we have to be a little careful in not commenting too much about ongoing judicial proceedings as a general rule. However, I'll say generally that there is a provision in the PTRA Act. There's also connected provisions within the licenses of telecommunication providers and various other statutes as well. It is perhaps not for me to comment whether the current situation justifies such measures. Those will be for the relevant authorities to answer whether it meets that standard. But certainly there is a high standard, a high bar that is set for when these measures can be deployed. And also, as the court has observed in various orders, various different loopholes have to be gone through, various different approvals have to be taken, and various different preconditions have to be met before such measures can be taken in the interest of national security. So if such measures have been taken, it will be for the relevant authorities to show that they complied with the relevant law, that they met the necessary preconditions, that they fulfilled the requirements that need to be met before these measures can be taken. And that is essentially what the court is looking at. Were all of these procedures, preconditions met before these measures were taken, if in fact they were taken? And that is also a point of contention, whether it was done. If it was done, was it done correctly in accordance with the relevant law?
Very rightfully shared, sir. Thank you so much. Sir, this particular point which you shared with us, you may well be knowing of another, pertinent issue or a pertinent discussion which took place in the past days regarding a firewall being put up on the internet providers and, the, in regards to interception of the data, which is, going over the broadband. So is this also something which the telecom sector or telecom laws cover, or would this be dealt separately?
I'm not aware of the specific provision that would apply. I would have to check the relevant provision. But, in these sorts of circumstances, whether it's what you just mentioned or whether it's, shutting down YouTube or Twitter, which is now called X, there's always a question that we all face, which is what balance, drawing the balance between national security or what someone perceives to be national security or national interest against people's freedom of information, people's right to access to information. And that is the fundamental question here, is when does national security or national interest trump citizens' right to information or access to information? And that's a constant bone of contention, and we can argue, and everyone has a different perspective based on your outlook and your experiences and the relevant law as to where does one draw the line between these two issues.
Thank you so much, sir, for putting us wise on the particular matter. So with this, I would like to ask you some questions from the comment section. We have viewers with us. We have some comments. So would it be feasible for you?
Yes, of course.
Wonderful, sir. Sir, the first question we have is from Mr. Mohammed Ahmad Salahuddin. He asked that technologies like Starlink are going to revolutionize telecommunication sector. What kind of new policies can we expect regarding these advancements and their usage in Pakistan?
I'm not sure what Starlink is. Perhaps that's my ignorance. Is it an internet service provider?
Sir, just as surface level info, what I have of it is basically an internet service which is being provided by the billionaire Elon Musk
Right.
through the technology of satellites orbiting the atmosphere. So it is a singular body which is going to be providing internet all over the world, a global internet service provider of some sort.
I would have thought that any country in the world will probably have certain requirements before Starlink or any entity like it can provide these services on the ground in any given country. Because, for example, in Pakistan, we have a sector which is regulated by PTA. You are required to obtain a license if you want to provide telecommunication, internet, whatever services that you want to provide. Now, even if this is from a satellite, I suspect that PTA and any other regulator within any other country will have to think about how to amend their legal regime in order to take into account this sort of service provider. They will need to make changes in their relevant laws, perhaps, because currently the legal framework perhaps does not take into account this sort of technology, this sort of service provider. So they will have to think about incorporating this, what kind of measures they would have to put in place. Would they require this provider, such as Starlink, to have a license? What conditions would it need to have, etc.? So I think this will be a challenge for the PTA and any other regulator in any other country Can I simply, sitting in Pakistan, just have access to this internet? Because the other service providers, internet providers, will have something to say about this. They will say, I'm required to obtain a license, spend money in order to provide internet services to these customers. And this other provider just comes without getting a license, without paying any money, is providing internet services at a cost and making profits. So they will say this is not a level playing field, and the regulator will have to address this concern. And how will it monitor this service provider is going to be a challenge for the PTA.
Very rightfully said, sir. Thank you for sharing. So the next question we have is from Ms. Hafza Khan, and she's asking that with the integration of telecommunication devices and services in the infrastructure and urban planning, what unique legal challenges may arise, and how can lawyers specializing in telecom law contribute to shaping the regulatory framework for these urban environments in Pakistan?
In terms of contributing, I think when we're engaging with the regulator or when we're engaging with the courts, I think constantly the law is evolving because of legal decisions which we play a part in. Often there are technologies, there are aspects of the legal framework that the PTA has not considered, which once litigation commences and concludes, they realize needs to be addressed. So often courts in their decisions tell PTA that they need to take into account of changing circumstances, technologies, etc., and make changes in the regulatory framework. Of course, we know that some things the PTA can do itself, other things Parliament has to do through change in the law. But the PTA can, of course, lobby and approach Parliament and recommend changes in the law that might be necessary. And we see every day that there are developments in phone devices, developments in the way we use mobile phones, which perhaps currently are not taken account of in the legal framework, which subsequently are because of legal cases, because of telecommunication companies lobbying and engaging with the regulator, whether it's through lawyers or otherwise.
Thank you for sharing, sir. So we have two questions. I believe they are connected to each other in some sort. Let me share with you. The first one is from, again, Ms. Hafza Khan, who asked that the use of loopholes to access websites/apps that are banned by the PTA is extremely common. I believe she is referring to VPNs. So how do the telecom services deal with this, and are there any legal repercussions to this? And furthermore, Mr. Syed Raza Ul Hassan asked that, do PTA deal with VPN, and do they have access to the data or activity which is carried on using VPN?
You see, a telecommunication service provider is providing you with data, phone calls, a package, whether it's postpaid or prepaid. And you pay a fee for the use of their frequency, for the use of their spectrum. So the telecommunication provider itself is not necessarily aware of or concerned with what websites you are accessing and how you are accessing them. In terms of the PTA, I'm not an expert on the technicalities of VPN. I'm not sure if the VPN, if the PTA becomes aware every time that an individual uses a VPN, that the person is using that VPN. I don't think the PTA has that sort of information. And even if it did, it would be very difficult for the PTA to monitor millions of people within Pakistan who may be using a VPN at any one time. So I think this is definitely an area which perhaps will develop over time. As we have more restrictions that are put in place on particular websites, particular social media platforms, the use of VPNs will increase. At this moment in time, I'm not aware of individuals being reprimanded, cautioned, fined, or otherwise, dealt with because of their use of VPN. I may be wrong, but I'm not aware of it. So it's definitely a challenge how to identify it and then how to address it. It would require a lot of manpower and man hours to monitor and then address the use of VPN, if even they can know whether you're accessing it in the first place.
Right, sir. Thank you for sharing. So we have another question that from Ms. Hassan. She asked that what are the potential legal challenges that the telecom industry in Pakistan might face with the advent of new technologies such as 5G and IoT?
IoT stands for, sorry?
I believe Ms. Hafsa Adil could have some clarity, could shed some clarity on that.
Okay, I mean, in terms of the new 5G technology, whenever a new technology is introduced, they auction frequencies, they auction frequency spectrum for that technology. So they will first and foremost have to ensure that the frequency that they allocate make available in the auction are clean frequencies. There's no interference in those frequencies, because in the past, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen that some of the frequencies allotted to some of the telecommunication providers have not been clean. They've had interference, so the telecommunication provider has not gotten what they bargained for. So they'll have to ensure that, and then of course they'll have to ensure, or at least take into account, that is there a level playing field, or is one telco going to be particularly dominant by acquiring a major chunk or major share of the frequency. So they'll also have to be mindful of that. And then there are other technological challenges that come with the new technology. They'll have to monitor things perhaps they may not be aware of that occur from time to time, so which requires a lot of vigilance from the PTA.
Thank you for sharing, sir. So just to share, IoT, I believe, is referring to Internet of Things, which is described as devices with sensors, processing ability, software, and other technologies that connect and exchange data with other devices and systems over the internet or other communication networks. So I believe it is, something related to having smart homes, and in
Okay.
particular communities where technology is connected to each other, and they are sort of creating a ecosystem of technology around being connected in every sort.
Okay, I must confess I'm not particularly familiar with it, but I'll just add in terms of legal challenges. As I said, there may be challenges in terms of the frequency that is allocated. There may be competition concerns after the allocation of the frequencies if one or more telco is of the view that they perhaps have not been given or not acquired as much spectrum as others. And if there's a monopoly created, that may give rise to competition concerns. So these are also some of the legal challenges that may arise.
Right, sir. So the last question we have is from, once again, Mr. Ahmad Salahuddin, who asked that after ban on various apps, people still use them with the help of VPNs, and the effect of the ban is minimized. How do you think PTA should respond to such people, or how does generally PTA respond to such people?
I think, as I said earlier, it's very difficult for the regulator, because an individual could be using a VPN from a foreign source. They may have paid for it. It might be a VPN company based outside of Pakistan. So first of all, how would the PTA identify that person's use of the VPN? Second of all, how can it monitor so many people at any one time? The PTA has limited resources. And third of all, what would it do in the event that it does identify the use of this VPN? The laws are not so advanced that provide for remedies in such scenarios of what would PTA do if it were to kind of catch someone using a VPN. So I think the answer is it's very difficult at this stage, both in terms of man hours, manpower, and remedies to go after individuals who may be using a VPN.
Thank you for sharing, sir. Thank you so much. Sir, if you allow, we have just one more question. If you could take that.
Sure.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. So, Ms. Mehak Meher is asking that how can telecom laws balance the needs of national security with individual privacy rights? Is it even a possibility?
I don't think a particular law can necessarily balance it. The act of balancing will be in the hands of the person, of an individual, of an authority, which is run by individuals. You see, a particular law may say that in a particular situation of national security, or in the interest of national security, or in the national interest, a ban or could be placed on something, or someone can be surveilled, etc. But at the same time, we have the Constitution of Pakistan, which protects our privacy, which protects our right to access to information. So when someone puts a ban on a particular social media platform, website, etc., or when someone decides to perhaps carry out surveillance or listen in on someone, then it is that authority that is making that decision. That no, we feel that national security and national interest trumps the fundamental rights. Therefore, we are going to ban X, Y, or Z, or we are going to surveil this person. So it's actually down to that authority, that those individuals who are responsible to make that judgment call. Now, that judgment call can, of course, be challenged in a court, and someone could say, no, that decision was wrong. In this instance, fundamental rights cannot be trumped by national security or national interest. So then that would be for a court to decide who was correct in that, whether the decision was correct or whether the correct balance was struck in that situation. I don't think that's something that the laws can take care of. That is something that is subjective, that has to be decided by a human.
Thank you so much for sharing, sir. Thank you so much. Sir, I believe Ms. Isha is back with us. Let me just add her to the stream before we conclude, and she can take over from here. So, Isha, I believe we're good to go. You may
Yes,
kindly
sir.
carry on with the session.
Okay. Sorry for the inconvenience, sir.
No problem.
Sir, thank you so much for your time and sharing such expertise with us and our team for organizing this event. I'm very thankful to you, and I extend my sincere thanks for the insightful webinar you presented on telecom laws. Your expertise and the information you shared were incredibly valuable and greatly appreciated. I found the session both informative and engaging. Thank you to all our attendees for joining us today, and all my team for organizing this event. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. And I hope that some of what I said was useful to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.